Hi, Robin. Hi, everybody.
Oh, so for everyone, let me introduce you to Dr. Allan Boesak. He is a South African Black liberation theologian who played a leading role in the anti-apartheid struggle. He is a prolific author and a global human rights activist. He teaches Black liberation theology and ethics at the University of Pretoria. He has been a recipient of numerous awards and honors, including the Martin Luther King Jr. Peace Award, among many. We count him as a friend and a mentor, and we are so grateful to him that he could make the time to share with us tonight, our time this morning in South Africa. So with no further ado, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you, Alan. Good morning, friends. Good evening. It's wonderful to be with you again and to be talking to you, even and this almost artificial, but now most normal way of communication between us. I'm sorry about the scare about the electricity, but that's the way things seem to be going in South Africa these days. Now, let me begin by saying I don't remember in my lifetime that we've had such multiple crises to deal with. And it's not only the pandemic, it's the state of our politics, it's the state of our environment, it's the state of our politicians, it's the standards that are set for what it means to be of service to people. It's the carelessness about people's lives, it's the dedication to ongoing war and destruction as if there is no alternative. It's what Jürgen Moltmann in a book that he wrote in 1990 called that for people of faith, it actually is a God crisis. Now, I don't have time to go into the meaning of that, but I think it's very relevant now. That's the first thing I want to say. The second thing I want to say is, for all of these reasons, I feel a bit like I imagine the Apostle Paul must have felt when he wrote his letter to the Romans. In that whole first chapter, time and time again, Paul expresses his desire, his longing to be with the church in Rome. Apparently, he has never visited them before. The church has been established without him, but he had this longing to be with the people in that church who were closer than anybody else to the heart of the beast, the Roman Empire. And what that must have felt, if even the churches on the periphery of the empire were undergoing such immense pressures. And so he writes and he says repeatedly, I wish I could be with you, how I long to be with you. And then in verse 11, he says this, for I am longing to see you, so that I may share with you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. And then immediately in verse 12, he goes on to say, or rather, so we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith, both yours and mine. So it's almost as if Paul in that verse 11 thinks, I've got to get to my friends, I've got to get to my siblings in Christ to encourage them, to let them know that the fight must go on, that Jesus is Lord. And then he understands, but it's not just about them. I need them as much as they seem to need me. We need to be mutually strengthened in our faith, not just my faith strengthening you, but your faith strengthening me. I think that is just about as accurate as I feel this morning. And that's how I am speaking to you like this, not in a despondent way, but as we are both in the same sinking boat and we are clutching at straws, but don't worry, we can always think of one another, but in a completely different way. Namely, we are both being challenged. We are all feeling the crises piling up. We are all feeling the multiple pressures. We are all feeling sometimes that hopelessness is just around the next corner. but we are anchored in that sense. We are reaching out to one another. We are speaking to one another. We are strengthening one another. We are encouraging one another because we are anchored in the same faith in Christ Jesus. And so we are reaching out, hands across the ocean, so to speak, not because we are drowning, but because we are anchoring each other. I say this because I have experienced this in my life. When I was visiting the United States, often in the 1980s, and things here at home were so out of control that I had no idea what would happen when I wake up in the morning, or what the day would be like when the sun sets. I had no idea what I would be doing, where I would be going, or whether I would be going anywhere, or whether I would be in jail, or whether indeed my family would come to pick up my body, that kind of time. When we went from funeral to funeral to funeral, and mostly the people that we buried were these young kids who had dedicated themselves in the struggle. And I remember questioning not just my sanity for being in this thing in the first place, but questioning the way the struggle was going, questioning the outcome, questioning whether God was actually in the struggle with us as God had promised us if we fight for justice and dignity of God's children. And I remember going to the United States and meeting with friends and praying with friends and sitting in worship services and having discussions. And then I came home, I felt immensely strengthened. And it made me think of that story in the gospel about the paralyzed man whose 4 friends brought him to Jesus. You remember that story? And how there was such a crowd around the house where Jesus was that they had to fight their way through the crowd. And when they couldn't get to the door, they found a way to go around it backwards and climbed up the wall and got onto the roof. And they actually broke the roof in to make a hole so that they can let him down on his blanket so that Jesus could see him. And that's an amazing story. But what strikes me about that story is that Jesus looks at this man, he heals this man. But he says to this man, it's because of the faith of his friends. That man had given up a long, long time ago. He never believed that he would ever be healed again. He could not see himself as a normal person again. He thought that his disability was his future, that he was chained to what he was at that moment. There was never going to be any chance of a different life for him. And he probably gave up, but he was saved by the faith of his friends. That's how I felt in those days, that I had almost come to the point of giving up. I was questioning too much. I could not see where this was going. And the faith of my friends, of our friends, of God's children in the United States, saved me in that respect. That's an enormous feeling of solidarity and of empowerment that one experiences. And something like that, I think, we might be in now. And I am praying that something like that might happen as you grapple with these issues, knowing that other people, Christians, people of faith, are praying with you, are battling with you, are struggling in their own ways, because everywhere there is a struggle, that struggle is connected to the broader struggle, not just for our concerns, but for the salvation of humanity, so to speak. We are not just fighting for our little climate issues here. It's the planet that we are struggling for. It is justice for all God's children that we are fighting for. And that connectivity is a great, great and wonderful thing to hold on to. So in that sense, we might sometimes feel lonely, but we are not really ever alone, not ever on our own. Not just because we believe that God is always with us, but because we know that other people have linked hands with us, and what we are saying to each other, we are refusing to let go of each other. That's what Paul is saying to the church in Rome, I'm longing to be with you, but I want to know, in the meantime, we are not letting go of each other in this ongoing struggle. We do that, of course, because our guiding principle is not just our faith, but also our hope. Because without hope, we really will be drowning. But your Chris Hedges, one of the most astute observers of society in the United States that I know, talks about hope that he perceives that drives politics. So politicians coming and they speak about hope, but he says it's actually just a kind of professional optimism. It's a sentimentalism that doesn't mean much because it's based on empty promises that will be broken tomorrow once that person is into power. It's based on the perceived power that that person has, or the power that that person makes you believe that person has, so that you can vote for that person, and that is your hope, even though you know that once that person is in that position in politics, most usually they cave into a power greater than themselves, like money or pressure or status or careerism. And so he says that's not the hope that we have. And I agree with him. That kind of hope is actually disempowering us. It is a hope that does not get us anywhere. For those of you who may remember and may have written or may have read the little book that I have written called Dare We Speak of Hope, you will remember that in that book I talk about the way that Church Father Augustine of Africa of the 4th and the 5th century had spoken about hope. Hope, he says, is a mother with two beautiful daughters. The one is called anger, and the other one is called courage. The anger at what we see around us, the outrage at the injustices done to others around us, and to ourselves, and at the world. And then the courage to get up and do something about it. That, he says, is what hope actually is. And so hope is that combination of seeing this is wrong and then understanding this must not be allowed to continue. And then to have the courage to do what is necessary in order to bring about that better tomorrow that people of hope always fight for. And I have seen that also in action, not in myself. I'm now talking about that young generation of the 1970s and the 1980s here in South Africa. I often think back, and I think it probably was the most dangerous time in my life, but it was also the most amazing, uplifting time in my life. I mean, I think about those young people, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, their whole future in front of them. I think about those young people and how they must have had hopes and aspirations and dreams for themselves, and how they did not only put that on hold, but they gave it all up to join the struggle for freedom and justice. And what drove them, I have come to understand. I was their pastor on the campus of the University of the Western Cape, and my students were always in the forefront of these battles every single day, week after week, month after month, year after year. And I have come to understand that what they are clinging to are not those slogans that one has in a social revolution, democracy and freedom. Of course, those things are important, but drove them mostly was hope. Because if you think about it, if you are 16 and 17 and you go out there and you are battered and you are and you are beaten and you are whipped with shambox. That's a kind of bullwhip that our police used to use. And you are tear gas and you are bitten by dogs and you are shot at um, with guns, with live ammunition. And you see your friend and your comrade and your schoolmate killed right next to you. And then on that next Saturday, you go to that person's funeral and you see what it means to stand in the struggle because you're burying him. Yet on Monday morning, when there's a new march, they are all there once again. Why did they do that? Why did they say, I have my dreams, I have my hopes, I have my own view of what I would want to become in life, but I am giving that up? Not that Archbishop Tutu and I, for instance, could give them any assurances. We could not say at today's rally, don't worry about it. There might be this, there might be dogs, there might be guns, there might be tear gas, there might be prison, there might be torture, there might be an open grave, but don't worry about it because by the end of this year, apartheid's power will be broken. We could never say that. There was no guarantee. We did not know how long it would take to break the power of the strongest and most sophisticated and most vicious regime on the continent of our time, with the most best equipped army and best trained policemen and an army of security people. I mean, we did not know how that would end, and yet something drove them other than the political slogans, and that was this hope that Father Augustine was talking about. And that's the hope we clung to. And that was real. It was really, really real. And so, and you see this mostly, not just in the actions of the students, in the thousands who come together, but you see it in the way we protested. Always our protests were accompanied, not accompanied as a weak word, sort of carried by our music, our songs in which we express our joy at being able to share in this privilege of fighting for something so noble and fighting for something so good. And let me quickly mention just two. The one song that I learned from our young people was a thing called Akana Mandla Usatani, which, if you translate that, means the power of Satan is broken. And the first time I heard that, we had a church service. I think it was a prayer service for Nelson Mandela, who was in prison at that time, and he was ill. And so they came to our church in their hundreds, and outside were people standing. And the students inside heard that students who were still coming on had been stopped by the police. There was a roadblock, and some of them had been arrested, and some are being put in those police vehicles. And so the students left the church. Of course, we all went out. We surrounded those police vehicles, and the students started dancing around those two police vehicles, singing this song, Akanamandla Usatani, the power of Satan is broken. And then I noticed something else. Every time they mentioned the word Satan, they were pointing to the police. And it was funny in a sense, but it was also, of course, how courageous must you be to see policemen with guns and dogs threatening you? There's a van that will take you to the prison, and you don't know whether you'll come out alive out of that prison. And yet you dance and you sing and you remind him, you represent the power of Satan, but that power of Satan has already been broken. That's the hope that I'm talking about. And then there's another song, which some of the churches, when I visited in the United States, were kind enough to actually learn and sing as I was asked to preach. And I'm not sure whether we ever sang that in Maui. It might be. You remember Tuma Mina? Yeah, we sang Tuma Mina, right? No, and Tuma Mina comes from Isaiah 6, when God asks Isaiah, whom shall I send? Who shall go for us? And then Isaiah says, here I am, Lord, send me. Now that's what Tuma Mina means, send me. And I was always thinking, these people, these children, these kids, these young students, were singing this thing, send me, Lord. knowing the difficulty, knowing the darkness, knowing the fear, knowing the uncertainty, knowing the risk, knowing the danger, knowing the life-threatening situation. Still, they were saying, send me, Lord, send me, Lord. Don't, don't let me push somebody else in my stead. Don't let me unload this responsibility my generation has on somebody else. Don't let me find excuses. Send me, Lord. Now, if you put these two songs together and you're saying to God, I know you need, because right before that, God did ask Isaiah, who will intervene for my people in this situation? And then these young people raised their hands and said, send me, Lord. And when they are in there, what keeps them strong? What keeps them courageous? What keeps them so bold that they could point at a policeman with a gun in his hand and tell him, you present the power of Satan, but your power is already broken. It's this hope that we are talking about. Now, I mean, it's Tuesday morning for me, and so I'm not in church, so I better discipline myself. So let me just say two more things from the Bible. I've been reading these days about Elijah. And Carl, I'll send you that thing because I think you'll appreciate. Uh, uh, and it really is in my mind. But there are two things about this Elijah story. A number of things, but there are two things at the end of the Elijah story that I want to share with you. You know that Elijah was on Carmel and did that thing with the prophets of Baal, and it was a triumph, which was not really a triumph if you have to murder 400 people to show how powerful God is. But that's another story. But then, as he lays himself down under that solitary broom tree, and God has to encourage him and make him understand that he is the one that has been sent by God for that particular time. And he keeps on saying, I am so alone, I alone am left, I alone am left. He keeps on, and God says, no, that's not true, Elijah. Stop moaning, stop groaning, stop lying to yourself. And listen to me, you are not alone. There are 7,000 of my children here in Israel who have not bowed the knee before Baal and who have not kissed his lips. 7,000. Now, 7,000 amongst all of Israel doesn't sound like much. For God, though, 7,000 is enough. 7,000 plus one, whose name is God. That's your victory right there. So even if it's only 7,000, that is what Elisha picks up from Elijah, because you remember when the Arameans come and they threaten Samaria and the king is in a panic and everybody thinks we are going to go down because they've laid siege to the city. Elisha says, no, don't fret, don't worry about it. Why? Because those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Even those thousands of soldiers up on the hills, those who are with us are more than those who are with them. That's the second thing about the Elisha stories that I want you to remember. And then the third thing, as Elijah prays for rain and to break that terrible, devastating famine and drought, he sends out his servant to go and see whether God is giving them a sign that the rain might come. And 7 times he sends him out. 6 times there's nothing. And the 7th time, the servant comes back. Yeah, he says, I see something. What? Elijah says. He says, I see a cloud as small as a human hand above the sea. And that's enough for Elijah. And then when he hears that, he says, okay, now I'm going to tell Ahab, you better run for your palace because the rain is coming. So I want to leave you with this. Look for that cloud as small as a man's hand. In the bigger scheme of things, it may look like nothing. It's what we believe, our faith is nothing against the powers arranged against justice. What we believe in our faith looks like nothing against the barrage of laws that are uprooted, the things that you have fought for so long that are now once again not just at risk, but actually being plucked out and thrown away, as if nothing had happened, if it hadn't been fought for with people's lives. It looks as if those powers are in places that are virtually untouchable by you and your prayers and your faith. What can you do about who sits on the Supreme Court? What can you do about those hundreds and hundreds of federal courts who can throw things out at whim and at will? And it seems they have unchecked power. What can you do about a party machine that rolls on like some bulldozer and flattens everything in its way? But look out for that cloud as small as a person's hand, because that's God's sign. Don't look for the big things right now. Look for those small signs that the rain is coming, that God has heard, that God is responding, that God knows, that God has seen, and that God surely will come. So if you put that together, the small hand, the 7,000, and the songs in the face of our young people, I think that is a way to keep us from losing hope and to keep us from drowning. Thanks a lot. I think we have some time to chat now.
Hi, Allan. We have a question here. I know one question is, where do we go from here in terms of what can we do? I know you're talking about hope, but what are some concrete things that in what you've had to do in South Africa? What are some parallels between the United States and what we are facing here? And where do we go from here? What kinds of actions should we be taking in the midst of dealing with our struggle with hope?
Well, hope remains the driving force, and that's why I have emphasized it so much in our discussion. Excuse me, excuse me. Thus far, but you know, I think you should target specific things, and many of these things begin with what we used to call a conscientization program to make people aware. I don't know how much awareness there is in the United States or in Hawaii, for that matter, if we should start at home, about what exactly is going on, what is being targeted, why are those things being targeted, and what can be the consequences, or what already are the consequences if those targeted things are actually removed. Say voting rights, say protection for the health of women, or protection for the right of women to make decisions about their own lives and their own bodies. What does it mean for the individual person? What does it mean for the community? And finally, what does it mean for the country? I don't know whether people understand. I mean, one of the things that I have seen in the United States is becoming increasingly clear in South Africa as well, is that it seems to me that the mass media has not just the role of propagandizing people on a scale that is bewildering. It is aimed at making people as ignorant as possible about what is really happening. I have seldom seen such obfuscation. I mean, maybe the most that I became aware of it was in 2003, was the propaganda around the lies that led the United States and the world into the Iraq War. But how concentrated they were on propagandizing those lies, on bringing them up all over the show every single time, and how they reinforce that. You're watching a movie, and all of a sudden there's a line or two or three or four that emphasizes the lie, and so people get literally so bamboozled and so confused. And so part of our job, Nick, would be to find out what are the specific things that people should know, that they are aware of that's being happening and being done to them. That's the first thing. So you must build up a solid foundation of knowledge, because you cannot build an action if you don't know what it is that you are fighting and why it is you are fighting it and where it is that you want to go. So I mean, that's very basic, but it seems to me we are being pushed back. So don't work from the premise, yeah, but I mean, voting rights have been since Martin Luther King's days, and people have made all these sacrifices. Everybody knows how important it is. Forget that, because it may very well be that a large number of people have come to take these things so for granted that they are taken totally by surprise, that all of a sudden they find a thing as basic, as fundamental as that being taken away from them. And their confusion is compounded. So don't make the mistake of thinking we know these things. Also, don't make the mistake of thinking that the new generation would understand what it had cost to get these rights, the price that people had paid, the road that people had walked to get these rights, and therefore how precious they are. They are not just everyday things. And so that conscientization program, letting people understand, sitting down with people, talking with people, writing about these things, we are back. And so we have to start almost from the beginning. But don't be disheartened by that, because the more you start at the beginning, the good thing is that we've had these things before, and you can fall back on the memory of earlier struggles. And it will come back as you go. That's the first thing. Once you have that, and you're sure that people begin to understand what it is that's been going wrong, why is it wrong, why should we fight it, what should be done to get it right, and or to put something else in its place, then you can begin to plan action. And again, those actions can be quite specific. We had the United Democratic Front, and the broad struggle was to get rid of apartheid, to break down that whole edifice. And it was a financial struggle, it was an economic struggle, it was a labor struggle, it was a social struggle, it was a religious struggle, it was a political struggle. It touches every aspect of our society. But there came a time when we realized we got to target something, and something as innocuous as beaches. I mean, apartheid also meant not only that we were confined to our own racially designed group areas where we might live, or where we might be buried, or where we go to school and where we go to church, but also, if you want to relax, there were beaches that were for white people only.
Oh.
And so we were not allowed to go and swim there. Sometimes in our coastline, you have those dangerous parts of the ocean where there's a big undercurrent and there's a big backwash and so on. And those beaches were given to us. So our kids are always in danger, because our beaches were not the safe beaches. The safe, beautiful white beaches that you used to see and that you see now in the pictures of tourism in South Africa, those were all beaches for white people. And there were huge signs that says this beach is for white people only, or no dogs or coloreds allowed, that kind of sign. So what do? We decide we target the beaches. So we bring thousands of people to those forbidden white beaches, and we flood those beaches. We pluck out the signs. We damage those signs. I mean, you got to do some disruptive action when you do something specific. We damage the signs. Some people just sort of covered them with blankets or whatever. But the point was that thousands of Black people streamed upon those beaches on the specific days that we had this campaign, and that we called All God's Beaches for All God's Children. That's specific. And it worked. One of those things, one of the few times that Archbishop Tutu and I were actually arrested together and taken to prison together was on one such an action at the beaches. That's one example. Another example. All our hospitals, even were not the private hospitals that were for white people only anyway, because only they could afford it. State hospitals were not just separate entrances, but separate buildings sometimes altogether. So Tygerberg Hospital here in our area was the East Wing was for the black people, and the West Wing was for the white people. Of course, West Wing had the best trained doctors, had more nurses, had more equipment, had best equipment, and all of that. So what do? I went one day and I invited British television. I can't remember whether American television was part of this campaign, but we invited television from abroad. Again, buses full of sick black people. And we took them to the White Hospital. And we said, you're gonna treat these people today, Dr. So and so and so, because down on the black side, there are thousands of people and you don't have enough people, and these people are sick, they need treatment today. He said, no. He said, okay, well, say it to the camera. Tell the world in the camera that you are a doctor with your Hippocratic oath and you refuse to serve a person, to treat a person just because their skin is black. So we won that battle. And so target the specific things. And if you're clever, you will go and find out which targets are the softest, where are they the most exposed, where can we hurt them most and most quick there. So those are the specific things that you can do, but you got to be serious about that campaign. You can't start one thing, and when you chased off a beach, oops, they hurt me today, I'm not going back tomorrow. You got to go back tomorrow. And you got to go back the day after that. And you got to get at this and go at this until you win. And so that's my experience. Of course, for things like that, you got to get a lot of young people who are not as afraid as us oldies. I don't know whether I will go today and sort of say to a policeman, get out of my way, I want my beach that God has given me. But you got to find a way to bring young and old together, to bring everybody who believes, but everybody has a role. And let me say one more thing. I've learned from the struggle in, no, this time it was not Palestine, it was Lebanon. When Beirut was in flames, remember that? And all these demonstrations day after day after day, and the country was grinding to a halt. There were these older people I saw in this documentary, and they were sitting under a tree, and they were mixing stuff, older women and older men. And the marchers were coming up and down, huge marches, thousands of people. And the interviewer went to one of the older women and said, what are you doing? She says, well, somebody gave us a formula. And if you mix this with this, it helps against the tear gas. And so all we are doing is we are making these bottles full of this stuff, and we hand it out to the people who march so that they can be armed against the tear gas. The older generation can no longer march, can no longer confront the police face to face and in person, but they can concoct a mixture that help the younger people against the effects of tear gas. That is a struggle. And that is so wonderful about that. And so those are the things that you guys need to think about these days, I think, if you're talking specifics.
Okay. We have 2 years before another presidential election. And as you've looked back on everything that you folks achieved and what you put into place in South Africa, as we look forward in the United States for the next 2 years, what are some pitfalls that we need to be aware of in how we approach things? What are some active things that you would think would be important for us to consider?
Well, don't put your faith in the promises of politicians, because that's a paralyzing thing. Politicians will promise you just about anything just to get elected. In my view, 90% of them are lying. 90% of them are thinking only of their own careers, and 90% of them don't have the courage to do what is right. We learned that the hard way. So 30 years down the line, after our struggles, and we thought that we had won all our battles, we are now almost back where we started in in 1976, and this time fighting a government that we have voted for, because we were so thoroughly deceived. And so I put my faith not in politicians. Of course, I put my faith in God, but I put my faith in people who are willing to take the risks and struggle right next to me. So and we hold for every action that you do. So build up. This is what we need to reach. What are the standards that we are setting? If politicians respond, what are the standards that we are setting for them? What good is a politician who promise you the world, but in our case, he can't fix the road in your township? What good is a politician who is willing to keep a global act of war going, but doesn't think, but there is money that my people need for things? I mean, what kind of people are we dealing with here? What is the standard for what W.E.B. Du Bois called the politics of decency and integrity and honesty and courage and virtue? Those are 5 things that are absolutely indispensable for any political structure, for any society to work. I have found, but that's because the way I read the Bible, that what I have discovered as a politician, if you sit down and you work out programs that would respond to these 5 standards, these 5 demands for politics that work in society, I mean, it actually can change people's lives. That's also gospel standards. So the Bible is not so far out of line when we take our cue and our courage from those biblical stories that we are being told, or the life and the ministry of Jesus of Nazareth. So set the standards and hold politicians to those standards. I mean, one of the greatest difficulties that we face, and not just in the United States, here in South Africa and across the world, is the sorry state of politics. The standards that we set for politicians. I mean, half of Europe is now on the brink of a new wave of new nationalism and fascism. How did we get there? It's because I mean, and one should not think it's always a joke that how come that the most incompetent people become your most powerful politicians in all these countries across the world? They are the least equipped. It seems as if the most mediocre person is given the most power and the highest authority. Why? Because they are the most pliable for the forces that want to run and shape this world. And so we got to set our standards really, really high. And don't be afraid to set those standards high and be specific. When you engage politicians, challenge them on these issues. 2023 cannot look like the elections of the past. I mean, you cannot say, it's not really what we wanted, but at least we got the lesser of 2 evils. Why? Because your children, God's children across the world, deserve more than that. That's what I say. I'm not, when I think politics, I don't any longer think of what my people need, housing and education. I think of what my people deserve for what they have done, for the sacrifices they have made, for the struggles they have fought. Why did Martin Luther King Jr. die? That's your question. What did he die for? Why did Rosa Parks do what she did? What is the standard? Those are the standards that we hold them to. And so you have those heroes in the United States, and they're not forgotten. They're not from 300 years ago. They're just from yesterday. So hold them to those standards and be clear that you are holding, and don't be afraid. Don't let them, politicians, tell you, well, you know, Rome wasn't built in one day. But there's a reason why politicians go into politics in 1 year. 2 years, they'd come out millionaires. You ask yourself the question, why is that so universal? It's true in the United States. It's true here. I know one politician in the United States, when she went into politics, she had $6 million. She leaves politics with $67 million. Now, how does that happen? And so you got to ask the tough questions. And it's we, the people, who have to set the standard, because we are the ones being ruled. But remember, we are being ruled by people who have power because we have entrusted them with that power. It's not theirs. You've got to take your power back. And the world is in such a crisis. I say to our people in South Africa, 1994, when everybody was going, whoa, 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 this is wonderful, this is great. 1994, for me, was like a four-way stop street. Everybody comes, stops, looks around, makes sure there's no car coming, no crashes, and then we cross. This time, 2022, is a crossroads. And we are in the dark, we have no clue. And we have to make very, very fundamental choices. And sometimes the choices that we make now, because it's such a crisis moment in world politics, within which our politics play out, the choices that this generation makes will affect generations to come, will affect the way world history goes. That's how I think about local politics and about national politics and about international politics. And that's why I am so stringent about the kind of politics that we intend to offer our people and what our people deserve. So those are the things that I think we should keep in mind between now and the next election. Yours is in 23, ours is in 24.
Okay, thank you. Here's one about social media. How do we deal with the widespread proliferation of social media platforms that continue to shape competing narratives of those on the right or left or those in between?
Well, social media is one of those evils that have come to stay. And the only good thing about that is that you can build your own platform, so to speak, with your own audience, and maybe include other. And you can build a platform dedicated to speaking truth, not just to the powerful, but also to the powerless. And so in the one sense, it'll be holding their feet to the fire, and the other sense, it'll be telling them to keep their eyes open for that cloud, even as small as a human hand. And so social media, all I can say is, if you can use social media, it can be a powerful tool for good as well. And you've got to use it as much. It doesn't help to say, it is so evil, it is so polluted, it is so toxic, I don't want anything to do with it. I don't have anything to do with it. That's mostly because of my ignorance. I don't know how to deal with these things. But what people do is to say, okay, Allan, I know how to deal with this. You say something and I will make sure that it goes up. So that's the only thing that we can do, because you cannot compete with mainstream media on television or in the newspapers as much as those are even being read anymore. But social media can be a powerful tool. And my suggestion would be, use it as much as possible. Be clear in your messaging. You don't have to decide. I mean, I don't know what is right or left anymore. So don't let them tell you this is right wing or this is left. Let that be. You choose for what is right, for what is truthful. And that is what you concentrate on. And even in the fog of what social media can do, the truth sometimes does pierce like the sunlight. And some people realize this is what I need to hear and understand, and this is what I need to do. So that's all I can say. I'm not saying we can win the battles on social media. I don't think that we can win the battles by social media, but I do think that social media can be a tool that can be used for good by those who claim that they stand for truth and good.
Allan, thank you for that. You know, even though we may not have huge platforms, one of the things that seemed to penetrate, to our surprise, I think, was we got the message out, not just us, but the message got out there that
Yeah.
democracy was in danger. And when they took exit polls of Americans voting, they were saying, I came to vote because our democracy was in danger. That message got out there. I was quite surprised. I wasn't sure people were hearing it,
Yeah.
but they did.
Well,
And it was heard. So I think that's that little cloud of the size of a hand that you're talking about. It gave us hope. You know, we knew somehow some of those messages actually were getting through.
right. No, but I mean, but that's all you can do. I mean, I see the things that are coming across my phone that other people send me, and sometimes, of course, it can drive you to distraction. You cannot understand, is it even possible for human beings to be so utterly devoid of understanding? But sometimes you get things, and from the most surprising quarters, and especially, of course, those young people. I mean, I'm saying to the one or two good politicians that we have here, you've got to concentrate on the young folk in ways that you have never done before. It's funny that with all of the social media and the activities and young people still say to me they feel neglected. Why? It's because they feel that they can say whatever they want to say, but they're not included in a conversation that makes sense. And if you are included in a conversation that makes sense, that try to unravel the truth, that grapples with what is right and what is wrong and where are we going to, it means if you're included in that kind of conversation, it gives you dignity. It means people give you worth. It means people think your opinion is worth something. And so if it is a real uplifting conversation, then when you come in as a young person, you have to come in at that level. You cannot come in with a kind of rubbish that sometimes goes on social media. But if you include them in that kind of conversation, and you say to them, your opinion is something that I treasure, I want to hear it, I want to interrogate you about it, I want to know why you say that, or why are you thinking that. It's amazing how, I mean, I'm not saying I'm doing all of this perfectly, but I get these opportunities. And one evening, I was speaking to the Methodist youth on Zoom. Now, the Methodist Church covers all of Southern Africa. So South Africa and Lesotho and Mozambique and Botswana and Malawi and so on. It was a wonderful conversation, very honest, very frank conversation with young people, hour and a half, almost 2 hours that night. A week later, the young man who organized the thing called me and said, Doc, you know how many people you talk to? If you multiply all our platforms, so Facebook and Twitter and this and that and the other, you spoke to almost 800,000 people that night. I mean, it blew my mind. I frankly did not believe it, because it's not like radio that has 3 million people or so listening. But he tells me how it works. Now, if half of those people were young people, and this was put together for young people, so if 50%, 400,000 young people were part of that conversation, it was a totally different conversation than the usual stuff that you get and the conspiracy theories and the nonsense about all sorts of things. And they felt empowered by that conversation. That gives me tremendous hope. I felt so encouraged. And I thought, okay, it's worth it. So when they invite me again, I will make time to prepare. I will make time to sit and talk with them. I will make time for the conversations afterwards. I will make time for those who did not get a chance to ask their question, and they say, can I have your email address? I say, yeah, sure, write me, and then we will talk. I like that because it draws them into a different space. It draws them into a space, not just of intellectual honesty, but of political integrity, of human worth. And that is worth more than the so-called power of the propaganda that is like a tsunami out there.
We have a couple more questions here. One of them is to ask you to speak of Ubuntu and the uprooting of xenophobia through Ubuntu. What can we in Hawaii and the USA learn from the idea of Ubuntu to help us find our way in these times when xenophobia is being used to separate us?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Ubuntu, which is, as you know, I mean, the person who asked the question obviously knows what it is. It's just that recognition that my humanity is not just connected to your humanity, but reflected in your humanity. And so I cannot be what I ought to be unless you are what you ought to be, is the way that Martin Luther King put it, without knowing Ubuntu. But it shows you how deep in the African consciousness that reality is. And so it is. I cannot exist as a human being unless you can exist as a human being. And so if you talk about Ubuntu and you talk about xenophobia, that is two opposites. The one destroys the other, or the one eliminates the other. Ubuntu can eliminate xenophobia, but xenophobia can destroy Ubuntu just as easily. I wrote somewhere that there are certain situations in which Ubuntu takes flight. She is like a battered, threatened, frightened woman who has to hide her face for what is happening in her name. And so Africans talk about Ubuntu, but we have seen horrific xenophobic acts in us. And what you see today, in different forms of xenophobia. It's also sometimes xenophobia mixed with racism. If you see the way in which Ukrainian refugees or Albanian refugees are treated in Britain or in Europe, and you contrast this with the way in which African refugees fleeing from war-torn countries like Sudan or Somalia are being treated by those same Europeans. I mean, right now there is this huge fight between France and Italy about boats of people that have been turned away from both ports of those countries, and they are drifting and they are drifting. And there are horror stories that one can tell. So that's xenophobia. And if it connects with racism, and it connects with abuse of power, like we see on the southern border of the United States, that is the ingredient for creating human tragedies on a scale that we will not be able to manage. Because the problem with these things is, if you don't manage them, not just in practical ways, but fundamentally dealing with the philosophy behind why are we doing this, or why are we not helping here. There's a philosophy behind it. There's an ideology behind it. There's politics behind it. And if it's politics and a philosophy, it's deliberate. There's a deliberate decision that this is how we treat this group of refugees, and this is how we treat this group of refugees. And so people of faith like ourselves cannot satisfy ourselves only by dealing with the practical outcomes. And so that means, you see what is happening at the border. So I go there and I pray and I give food and I give clothes and I walk away and I go back to my church. But you also, that's important, because a bottle of water saves lives. Let's be clear. So I'm not denigrating that. All I'm saying is that it's not enough. You have to constantly engage yourself, your group, and your authorities on the philosophy behind the action. Why is it that you are doing this? What is it that drives you to make this decision rather than this decision? Make you take this action rather than that action, because there's always an alternative. The problem is we have left interrogating our alternatives and our deepest motivations so late that we are so overwhelmed by the realities, we can only deal with those realities on a piecemeal scale. And we never get to the question, why are we doing what we are doing, or why are we not doing what we should be doing?
Mm-hmm. Here's a something that applies to your relationship with Hawaii and your time here. Someone is asking, what encouraged you from your stay in Hawaii?
This has to be my last question because I have a 10 o'clock media conference that I have to attend. Hawaii is still a precious, precious thing for my family. And Elna threatens me just about every other day. When are we going back? When are we going back? When are we going back? And she has a point, and my children too. The thing about Hawaii that struck me was the community that we found there. I mean, I walked in that church, Kiliau, for the very first time, and I come from a totally different context, totally different background. And I cannot remember when last I had felt so immediately at home. And I thought you guys were not doing this because you were trying to impress this visitor from outside. I thought this is just how it is, because I mean, no matter how much you try, you can't make it that natural. You may be good in fooling tourists, but you cannot be that natural, that quickly, that immediately. That's not possible. So it's something in that church in Maui. And it's something in the relationships that we were able to build up so quickly. I mean, who becomes friends in such short time? And friendship that stands the test of distance and of different circumstances and of all sorts of things happening in between. And still, when I talk to you, I'm thinking, I'm talking to family. And so all I can say is, I don't know what your secret is. And I don't know whether you are willing to share that secret with the world. Maybe you should, to make the world a better world. Maybe you shouldn't, because the world messes it up the moment they know the secret, and they put in all sorts of other ingredients that don't help. And so maybe you should keep it to yourself, so that Hawaii must, in a certain sense, for people like myself and for others, remain a place of refuge, almost a bit of a sanctuary, where if we know we are going to Hawaii, I don't have to take any extra thoughts with me. How do I deal with this? How do I handle this? I can just be when I get there. And I'm sure there are millions of people who might feel this way. So whatever it is that God has given you, hold on to it, grow it, nurture it, cherish it, teach it to your children, or let your children see it in you, and let people like me in need of such wonderful warmth come and drink at your fountain from time to time.
There are a lot more questions, and I know you have to leave, Ellen. What shall we do with these other questions? Maybe we can forward them to him.
Send them to me. Send them to me, and I will try. I'll try to respond.
Okay. Allan, we want to say thank you so much. And we also want to honor your wife as well, who we know has been an incredible life partner. I know she didn't get to quite join us. She was trying, but please tell her thank you for us, for
I will.
All of the wonderful work she does and has done in her life. Dr. Allan Boesak, for those of you who haven't met her, she's a powerhouse in her own right. And so we were so blessed to have you both here with us in Hawaii. And we look forward to that in the future. But in the meantime, we can't thank you enough for the time you gave us tonight. We are so grateful.
Thank you, guys. It's been a wonderful pleasure as always. Our love to all of you, and I hope that Elna and I and the kids will see you very soon. Thank you. God bless you all.
Aloha.
Bye.